Beowulf, A New Telling, by Robert Nye. Chapter 6. Beowulf against Grendel. Beowulf's men were weary and soon slept. They lay stretched out on couches all round the hall. Their sea voyaging, followed by the march to Heorot and the many cups of mead Hrothgar had given them, made them sleep deeply. Only Beowulf and Unferth stayed awake. They sat on either side of the empty throne, watching for Grendel's coming. Unferth played with a silver trinket. He kept pouring the little chain through his fingers, its links making a tinkling sound. Sometimes he drew it so tight about his wrist that it hurt. He smiled to himself in the dark. He had stopped drinking. He was afraid, but his fear fascinated him. His bladder ached. He wanted to make water, but he did not dare go out in the night to do so. He twisted about on the hard, uncomfortable step. He could feel the sweat trickling out of his hair. Beowulf sat still. It was a long night. It wore on slowly. The torches burned low. One of the Geats cried out in a bad dream. He woke, saw his leader's face, and turned back to sleep again. A torch sputtered and went out. Beowulf could see well in half-light. He did not blink or shut his eyes. Once he cracked his knuckles. Otherwise, he just watched and waited. There was no sign of Grendel. Unferth began gnawing at his fingernails. They tasted of dirt and where he had been poking at his boil. Unferth hated the taste of himself, but he had to have it. Beowulf still sat still. Then, as dawn began to drain the dark, both men heard a sound. Beowulf heard it first. It was a sound like the breaking of ice underfoot. It came quick and was gone again. Unferth shook his head, wondering if he had imagined it. Then there was a hissing, gasping, panting noise outside the door, swiftly stifled, as though someone, or something, was holding his breath in the dark, waiting to pounce. Again there came that splintery sound. Unferth's blood ran cold. He cowered into shadow. He felt his own water leaking down his leg, sore and warm and sticky. Beowulf stood up. His voice rang through the raftered hall. "Grendel!" he cried. "Grendel, child of Cain, come down into Heorot. I am Beowulf, son of Ecgtheow. I am Beowulf, not afraid of you. I am Beowulf, come to kill you." The monster squealed with rage. His throat was full of the noise of crunching bones. He scrabbled at the door. He tore it down with his talons. He fell into Hall Heorot. The first thing Beowulf noticed was the smell. It hit him like a great wave of rotting matter, rank, malignant, bringing tears to his eyes and making him cough. It filled the hall like a poison gas. He retched at the stink of the beast. It was because Grendel was so huge and black that the smell came before anything the eyes could make out. He was a foul fog, a choking murk of evil vapors, looming and slithering on the ivory floor. Then Beowulf saw coil after coil of slimy skin, mucid, spongy, dripping with the filth of the swamps, smeared thick with blood and scum, maggoty, putrid, and a pair of eyes glaring green, and slobbering lips, and huge claws reaching. Before Beowulf could move, those claws snatched up one of the warriors stirring out of sleep. Grendel tore his victim limb from limb, picking off arms and legs, lapping up the blood with a greedy tongue, taking big bites to crunch up bones and swallow gory mouthfuls of flesh. In a minute, all that was left of the man was a frayed mess of veins and entrails, hanging from the monster's mouth. Unferth was being sick. The green eyes flickered in his direction. He screamed and scratched at the wall for a hiding place, but there was none. 2 torches went out as Grendel slithered past them. The hall was left completely in darkness, save for some inklings of dawn at the smashed door and where the windows were. The Geats jumped up in panic and fought with each other, trying to find their swords and spears. Grendel made a new noise above the uproar. He gurgled bloodily with glee. The dark was his den, his home, his proper habit. He hated light. The hall shook to its foundations with his terrible laughter. He groped for Unferth. But all at once the light had caught him. It had him by the claw. It was Beowulf. The creature gave a dreadful squeal as Beowulf touched him. 10 strong fingers locked about his hairy wrist. To Grendel, it was as if the sun itself had caught him in its clutch. Made of wickedness as he was, the good in this man burned him. The mortal fingers were like 10 red-hot nails driven into his skin. Grendel had never known strength like this. He roared and shook to be free, to crawl away, to escape into the ruins of the night, but Beowulf would not let him go. Now Beowulf began to talk. His voice was quiet, and there was hullabaloo in the hall, what with the soldiers rushing about confusedly in the dark, and Unferth screaming, and the monster threshing about to get loose. Yet Grendel heard every word like thunder in his brain. He did not know what was worse, Beowulf's grip or what Beowulf said. Beowulf said, "Light holds you, Grendel. Light has you in its power. You, who have shunned the sun, meet me, once stung by bees that drank the sun. There's honey in my veins, Grendel, a liquid sunlight that can kill you quite. These fingers that you feel are 10 great stars. Stars have no fear. I do not fear you, Grendel. I do not fear, therefore I do not fight. I only hold you, child of Cain. I only fix you fast in your own evil, so that you cannot turn it out on any other. It is your own evil, Grendel, that undoes you. You must die, creature of night, because the light has got you in a last embrace." Grendel was in a fury. He bellowed and lashed. He wanted above all else to get away from this thing that was so contrary to himself. He tried every vicious trick he knew, but Beowulf stood firm, holding the monster in a grip so tight that it almost made his own big fingers crack and the bones poke out of the straining flesh. Hall Heorot rocked down to its stone roots with the rage of the demon struggling. Somewhere deep in Grendel's hellish heart, a memory stirred. It grew and spread and flooded his whole being with despair. Something to do with Light and another of these children of day, one who had flung herself between him and his food, and by her love had thwarted him, so that he had felt powerless to approach and had slunk away, abashed by mystery. Grendel did not know the word love or the word good. To him, they were part of the light he hated. There had been such light about that woman in the blue cloak. He had had to get away from it, but the light in the woman was as nothing to the light in this man, Beowulf. And try as he would, he could not get away. Grendel grew angrier and angrier. He shook his arm about and dashed it against the wall. Beowulf, badly bruised, refused to relinquish his hold. When shaking did not work and banging did not work, Grendel tried jerking his arm, but Beowulf wound his own legs round a pillar. He took the full force of the monster's pull and still held on. There was a fearful snapping of bones and tearing of sinews and muscles. Then hot, stinking blood fountained everywhere. Beowulf had pulled Grendel's arm out of its socket.